we go. All right, there we go. Thanks, everyone. Good morning. We'll call the case of United States versus Kara Bassett to order. My name is Judge Cotter. Scoring judges, as a reminder, for this portion of the trial, at least until the first witness is called, go ahead and switch your screen mode into speaker mode, not panelist or not gallery mode. And with that, we'll start with getting appearances for the record. So let's start with the prosecution. You may state your appearances.
Good morning, Your Honor. My name is Emily Aikens, and I'll be representing the government in today's case. I'm joined by my second chair, Jake Ruderman.
Good morning, Your Honor.
Thank you. Defense counsel.
Zoya Charania on behalf of the defendant, Kara Bassett, Your Honor. We're ready to proceed with preliminary matters.
All right, let's start with the government, see if they have any preliminary matters first, and then I'll hand it back over to you. So,
yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor, the government does have a few preliminary matters. First, we'd like to ask that pursuant to Rule 615, all witnesses be constructively sequestered, barring the party representatives. The government does not have a party representative in today's case.
All right, defense, do you have any objections to that motion to exclude witnesses?
No objections, Your Honor.
All right. Anything else from the government?
Yes, Your Honor, we would just like to draw the court's attention to stipulation number 7. It states that exhibits 4 through 33 have been pre-admitted and may be used at any time throughout the course of today's trial. That's
my understanding. Is that consistent, defense counsel?
Yes, Your Honor, pursuant to evidentiary ruling number 7, that is consistent with it.
All right, great. The court will take notice of that.
And finally, Your Honor, we would just ask that if you can't see or hear us at any time, please let us know.
Sounds good. You got it. Defense, any other preliminary matters?
Yes, Your Honor, just a few. Would you like us to ask permission before screen sharing the exhibits that have been pre-admitted into evidence?
Not for ones that have been pre-admitted. Do ask for the ones that haven't, if you intend to offer something that has not been pre-admitted in that collection of exhibits, just so we can note that it's constructively outside the presence of the jury for purposes of showing it to the witness. Thank you.
Yes, Your Honor. We also ask that stipulations be considered already part of the record, but while we reserve the right to cite them at relevant times throughout the trial, we ask that they not be read into the record at this time in the interest of our time here.
I think that sounds fair. Prosecution counsel, any objection to that motion?
No objection, Your Honor.
All right, so we will constructively read all of the stipulations onto the record. We'll assume that they're part of the record before opening statements. And as defense counsel mentioned, feel free to highlight specific portions or read stipulations as the need arises.
Your Honor, we also ask that witnesses be considered constructively sworn in the interest of time.
Any objection to that?
No objection, Your Honor.
All right, witnesses will be constructively sworn once they're called.
Yes, Your Honor. And lastly, I'd like to take a moment to introduce myself and my co-counsel to the court. Good morning or afternoon, Your Honor, members of the jury. My name is Zoya Charania, and today I represent the defendant, Kara Bassett.
My name is Andrew Mayette, and today I'm the second chair on behalf of Kara Bassett.
To proceed.
All right, thank you, counsel. Then with that, we'll proceed with opening statements. Government, you may proceed whenever you're ready. And as just a last note and reminder, make sure everyone's mode is in speaker view for this portion.
He was just a means to an end. May it please the court, opposing counsel, and members of the jury. It's July 2017, and Don Clark fears for his life. His wife, Kara Bassett, just threw a vase at his head after threatening to kill him. You see, when they met, the defendant thought that she had found her ticket. It had always been her dream to open an elephant sanctuary, but she didn't have the money. That's where Don Clark came in. He bought her an elephant park. But instead of making it a sanctuary, he made it a zoo. This infuriated the defendant. But fight after fight, threat after threat, she failed to convince Dawn to let her take over the park. So what did she do? She did what she said she was going to do. She killed him. On August 18th, 2017, the defendant snuck a syringe of carfentanil from the elephant park, hid it in her nightstand. When her husband came in to go to sleep that night, she grabbed that syringe. And knowing that it would only take a few drops of the lethal drug to kill him, she didn't hesitate. She killed him. And 2 months later, she used his money to reform the elephant park. Now, today's case, we, the government, bear the burden of proof. But we have to prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant intentionally killed her husband, Don Clark. Now, reasonable doubt doesn't mean beyond any doubt. It means beyond doubt that is based in fact, not conjecture. We will more than meet this burden because we'll show you 3 things: the intentions, the incriminating evidence, and the inconsistencies. First, the intentions. The evidence will show that the defendant meticulously planned out this crime. You'll hear she approached Don's lawyer 3 months before he disappeared to get power of attorney, which ensured that when he went missing, she inherited his assets. You'll learn that a disappearance clause isn't standard, but that the defendant insisted on it. Why? Because she knew what she was about to do. Second, the incriminating evidence. FBI agent Brandon will tell you that a syringe of carfentanil went missing from the park's property, a syringe that the defendant had access to. You'll hear that after she used that syringe, GPS records and algae samples show that she drove Don's van to the Big Gum swamp, where she hid the body. She deposited evidence. And third, the inconsistencies. I expect Attorney Charania to come before you and tell you that Kara Bassett was concerned about her husband when he went missing. But members of the jury, you'll learn that she didn't call him, text him, or try to contact him in any way whatsoever. Not only that, but the evidence will show that she didn't even contact the police about the disappearance until a week after he was gone. Members of the jury, to Kara Bassett, Don Clark was just a means to an end. That's why at the conclusion of today's trial, I'll come before you, and I'll ask you to find Kara Bassett guilty. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. Defense, you may proceed with your opening statement whenever you're ready.
May it please the court. What was Mr. Clark's ex-wife doing the night he disappeared? Where was park employee Kelsey Stebbins the night he disappeared? Why are Miss Stebbins' fingerprints in Mr. Clark's car? Miss Emily Aikens failed to answer all of these questions because the government was looking in the wrong direction. The government holds the highest burden of proof in our justice system. They must prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Don Clark is dead, that Miss Bassett is the only one that killed him, and that she did so intentionally and deliberately. Beyond a reasonable doubt means they must answer your questions. If by the end of this trial you have any unanswered questions, any hesitation, then you must find Miss Bassett not guilty. And you will have hesitation. You will have questions, because this case is overflowing with doubt. The government was looking in the wrong direction. Members of the jury, do you know that Don Clark is dead? Let's see what the government brings to prove he's dead. Lead investigator Steph Branham will tell you they have no body. See if the government can tell you the actual cause of death, the actual manner of death, the time of death, the determined murder weapon. It was the government's burden to prove that Don Clark is dead. But you'll learn the evidence equally supports the possibility that he's alive. Filmmaker Joe Young will tell you that Mr. Clark had a house in Costa Rica, on a plane to get there, that Mr. Clark spoke to one of his employees about wanting to start over and disappear. Phone records will show that Mr. Clark was on the phone with someone in Costa Rica the day he disappeared. The car that was used the night he disappeared was found parked at the airport. So I ask you, do you know that Don Clark is dead? If by the end of this trial you even have to hesitate before answering that question, the government failed to meet their burden. They will also fail to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Miss Bassett killed him. Miss Emily Aikens told you that this was a means to an end for Miss Bassett. But she failed to mention that the FBI didn't interview Park employee Kelsey Stebbins, who worked with Don Clark and Kara Bassett for 5 years, who had access to the elephant tranquilizers, whose fingerprints were found in Mr. Clark's car. Instead of interviewing her, the government looked in the wrong direction. They failed to mention Lisa Clark, Don Clark's ex-wife, who threatened to kill him, who harassed him to the point where he considered seeking a restraining order against her. So surely the FBI interviewed her, right? Surely the FBI made sure she had an alibi. But yet again, they looked in the wrong direction. Lisa Clark has no alibi for the night Mr. Clark disappeared, but Miss Bassett's phone records show she was at her residence the entire night. So members of the jury, I ask you, why is it that Miss Bassett is the defendant when Mr. Clark's ex-wife has no alibi and threatened to kill him? The government will fail to meet their burden because they were looking in the wrong direction. At the end of this trial, you will have unanswered questions, and you must find Kara Bassett not guilty. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. At this point, let's just give our jurors a minute so they can switch their mode from speaker to gallery in preparation for the witness testimony. And with that, prosecution, you may call your first witness.
Yes, Your Honor. The government calls Agent Steph Branham to the stand.
All right. Agent Branham, you are constructively sworn.
Could you please introduce yourself to the members of the jury?
Hi, I'm Special Agent Steph Branham with the FBI Tallahassee Field Office.
Agent, how many investigations have you led in the FBI?
I've led well over 100 violent crimes investigations, including murder and abduction cases.
You mentioned the violent crimes cases. Do you have any specialized training in violent crimes investigation?
Yes, ma'am. I've taken training from Quantico, Virginia in criminal investigation, evidence collection, interrogation, really all aspects of these investigations.
How did you get involved in today's case?
I was called to investigate the disappearance of Tallahassee resident Don Clark.
Agent, have you formed an opinion to a reasonable degree of certainty about
Yes, ma'am.
Have you applied your specialized knowledge in violent crimes investigation to your opinion?
Yes, ma'am.
What materials did you rely upon while forming that opinion?
Through the course of my investigation, we collected exhibits 3 through 44. All of these helped me form that opinion.
Are these the type of materials that are typically relied upon by experts in your field?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, ma'am.
Your Honor, at this time, the government offers Special Agent Steph Branham as an expert in criminal investigation, specifically in the investigation of murder.
Any objection to that, defense counsel?
No objection to the investigative expertise. However, we ask that it stays limited, the testimony stays limited to that, as Agent Branham is not an expert in forensics. So opposing counsel plans on using forensics conclusions and methodologies. I ask that those be limited to just relaying the information in the forensics report and not conclusions made by Agent Branham.
Okay, I think that's an appropriate objection if that issue arises. I think as defined by government's counsel, the scope was limited to investigations with a specialization in murder investigations, if I have that correctly. So we'll construe the scope of her expertise as prosecution counsel just represented. And you can
Yes.
raise those issues if you think they arise. All right, Agent Branham will be so recognized by the court.
Agent, can you please walk us through the findings of your investigation?
Yes, ma'am. It's my conclusion in totality that on August 25th of 2017, Miss Cara Bassett injected her husband, Don Clark, with a lethal dose of carfentanil, disposed of his body in the Big Gum Swamp, and then dumped his van at the Kerry Belleon Airport, 5 miles from her home, where it remained until my team recovered it on August 25th, 2017.
I'd like to talk to you about something Attorney Charania mentioned in opening statements. She suggested that Don Clark might not be dead. I want to make something clear for the jury. Who was the one who requested that Don Clark be declared dead in the first place?
The defendant, Cara Bassett.
And when did she request this?
As soon as she legally could, exactly 1 year after Mr. Clark's disappearance.
Now, I'd like to talk to you about the defendant's intentions. What's the Greater Tallahassee Elephant Park?
The Greater Tallahassee Elephant Park was once a zoo purchased for the defendant by Mr. Clark, where visitors could come and see elephants. At that time, they were in cages, I understand.
Whose idea was it to open the park?
Miss Bassett, she was an elephant enthusiast.
And what did Cara Bassett want the park to look like in terms of the care for the elephants?
Objection, Your Honor. Agent Branham cannot testify as to what Cara Bassett wanted. Foundation has not been laid that Miss Bassett was interviewed or how Agent Branham would even know what Miss Bassett was thinking and what her internal feelings were as to her state of mind, her intentions, and what she planned on doing.
Your Honor,
Prosecution, please respond. Yes.
Yes, Your Honor. This witness testified that she is familiar with exhibits 4 through 33. Additionally, 3 through 44, Your Honor. And Your Honor, this witness did interview Cara Bassett in one of those exhibits, Exhibit 3. Now, pursuant to Rule 705, experts are allowed to give opinions without laying the specific foundation. This witness did testify to the material she relied upon, and she's only basing her opinions off of those materials, Your Honor.
Okay, I think I'm going to ask the witness to be a little more specific in this case. I agree, and that is what 705 says. However, I think we do need to know at least the basis of the information other than from a large volume of documents. So we can disclose the source of the information without disclosing the underlying facts. That there was no danger of tainting the jury's impressions. So I'm going to ask the witness to be a little more specific, at least about the source of the information, particularly about something that sounds like a person's mental impressions. So the objection will be sustained to that effect. Please instruct the witness or have the witness answer at least specifically about the source of the information.
Yes, Your Honor.
Now, Agent, can you tell us about the defendant's intentions for the park, including where you got that information?
Yes, ma'am. Following an interview with Miss Cara Bassett, which is contained within Exhibit 3, I learned that Miss Bassett wanted this park to be more of a sanctuary rather than a business, which I understand Don Clark would have preferred.
How did Cara Bassett respond to Don Clark's differing view for the park?
Not positively, is my understanding. She actually did change the park into a sanctuary soon after Mr. Clark's disappearance.
Agent, are you familiar with Exhibit 34?
I am, yes. This is a protection from abuse petition filed by Mr. Clark against Miss Bassett, the defendant. It's essentially a request for a restraining order.
Your Honor, the prosecution offers Exhibit 34 into evidence.
Any objection?
Yes, Your Honor. I object to improper character evidence under Rule 404. This exhibit contains information about Ms. Bassett's actions that I believe opposing counsel is going to be using to prove action and conformity, which is not admissible under Rule 404.
All right, is there a specific portion of the document that you're moving to strike, or do you want to exclude the document in its entirety?
Exclude the document in its entirety because it contains all information that Don Clark alleged Cara Bassett took against him, which again would be being used to prove action and conformity.
All right, understood. Prosecution, what's your response?
Yes, Your Honor. We're not using this evidence to show propensity, but rather to show that Kara Bassett had an intent to harm Don Clark under Rule 404B2.
Defense, do you have a response to that?
Yes, Your Honor. In that case, I would object to this being more prejudicial than probative. This document is a petition that was filed. However, it was denied by the courts, so its truthfulness cannot be determined as a court in Tallahassee, Florida denied its motion. Additionally, it's meant to inflame the passions of the jury, as Ms. Bassett was not the one who made this document. These are all allegations made by Don Clark that are solely meant to inflame the passions of the jury.
Can you point me to a specific portion of the document that you think raises an inflammatory issue under Rule 403?
Yes, Your Honor. The second page of the exhibit has a small paragraph written by Don Clark. In that is his statements of what he experienced with Kara Bassett and her actions and something that she said to him, which is meant to inflame the passions of the jury. As I said, the probative value cannot be determined to a certain extent because this document was not it was filed, however, it was declined by the courts. So it is meant to inflame the passions of the jury, and its probative value cannot be determined effectively.
Okay, I tend to agree. I think this does raise character evidence issues, the danger that the jury will take it for propensity inference, particularly in the absence of the cross-examination of the declarant, also I think raises concerns. So on that grounds, I'm going to sustain the objection and Exhibit 34 will be not admitted.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Agent, I'd like to turn to the operation of the park today. Is the park still operated as a sanctuary? As a zoo?
No, ma'am. As I mentioned earlier, soon after Don Clark's disappearance, Miss Bassett was actually able to claim that park as her own and turn it into a sanctuary, running it as she would have preferred.
What gave her the legal right to make that change?
Well, a few months prior to his disappearance, Mr. Clark and Miss Bassett had agreed upon a power of attorney agreement, which specifically stated that should Don Clark disappear, Miss Bassett would inherit all of his assets, including that park.
Is a disappearance clause standard in a power of attorney document?
No, ma'am.
Objection, Your Honor. Improper testimony. This witness is an expert in criminal investigations, not practicing the law, which would require she would require that knowledge to make the assertion that a disappearance clause is not standard in a power of attorney agreement. That is something that a lawyer or an attorney would have knowledge of, not a criminal investigation FBI agent.
May I respond?
Please.
Your Honor, in Exhibit 4, which has been pre-admitted, and Agent Branham testified that she reviewed this document, it states by Mandy Tuminelli, Don Clark's lawyer, that this clause is not standard. Additionally, Your Honor, may I make an offer of proof?
Sure.
This witness was going to go on to testify that she interviewed various lawyers and they all told her that this clause is not standard. So while she is not an expert in legal issues, she is allowed to give an opinion based on her review of the materials and the opinions by other lawyers.
Okay, pending that offer of proof, and again, if we can, again, there's no danger, I think, if these documents have been pre-admitted in certain cases of letting the jury know some of their contents. We're towing a fine line, but let's make sure that at least that we know the basic source, knows where this is coming from, and we can distinguish between what this witness's impressions are versus her conclusions based on evidence that she analyzed. So let's give the witness an opportunity to answer a little further, identifying the source and pending that offer of proof. So it'll be overruled subject to that offer.
Yes, Your Honor.
Agent, can you tell us how you know, and if you know whether a disappearance clause is standard?
Yes, ma'am. To my knowledge, it's not standard. I spoke to a number of attorneys as part of my investigation. They all indicated to me that this was, in their opinion, highly unusual.
Now, I'd like to talk about the incriminating evidence that links the defendant to this crime. I'm showing you what's been pre-admitted as Exhibit 18. Now, you previously testified about a syringe of carfentanil that Kara Bassett used to kill her husband. How would she have had access to this drug?
Well, these syringes were actually stored on Miss Bassett's elephant park. They were used as elephant tranquilizers right near Miss Bassett's home. She could access them at any time for any reason.
Was there any way that the park employees kept track of those syringes?
Yes, ma'am. Exhibit 19, which I also collected as part of my investigation, is a log which the park was legally required to keep to track those tranquilizers, as they are a dangerous substance.
How many syringes were supposed to be in the shed, according to that log, when you investigated?
24 syringes, ma'am.
And how many syringes were there?
23.
Now, Agent, you previously talked about the fact that Kara Bassett drove Don Clark's van to the Big Gum Swamp. Do you have any GPS records to confirm that?
I do. Mr. Clark's van naturally kept, or automatically, kept GPS logs, whether he was using a GPS or not. So using that GPS tracking, we were able to recreate Mr. Clark's movements on that night, including his trip to the swamp.
And who do you believe was driving that van to the swamp?
Based on the forensic evidence, Miss Bassett.
In opening statements, defense told us that Kelsey Stebbins' prints were on that van. Did Kelsey Stebbins ever drive that van because of her employment at the park?
Yes, ma'am.
So did she use this van as she was doing her normal duties around the park?
She absolutely did, yes. But no further forensic evidence suggested that she would have been behind the wheel of the van that particular night.
Now, I'd like to talk to you about forensic evidence that indicates Kara Bassett went to the swamp. Did the FBI conduct any tests that show this?
We absolutely did, ma'am. We collected mud and algae samples from the Big Gum Swamp and cross-referenced them with mud and algae samples from Miss Bassett's boots, which we collected at her residence, as well as a wheelchair kept on the park and the gas and brake pedals of the van in question.
Now, Agent, I'd like to talk about the conduct of the defendant after her husband went missing. I'm showing you what's been previously admitted as Exhibit 22. Did the defendant try to call, text, or contact her husband at all after he went missing?
She did not.
Did she try to call the police at all on the day she realized her husband was missing?
No.
When did she finally contact the police?
August 25th, 1 week after Don Clark was last seen alive.
Now, finally, I expect Attorney Charania to tell you that it's hard to find that they couldn't find Don Clark's body in the swamp. I'm showing you a demonstrative that I've marked Exhibit 50. Can you please explain what this demonstrative represents?
Yes, ma'am. The green square is representative of the Big Gum Swamp. It was 13,000 acres in size. And then that small black dot is Mr. Clark's body. As you can see, looking for Mr. Clark in such a large swamp would be like looking for a needle in a haystack.
Thank you, Agent. I have nothing further, Your Honor.
Thank you, counsel. Defense, cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor.
You may proceed whenever you're ready.
Agent Branham, Don Clark was declared dead on August 18th, 2018. Is that your understanding?
That's correct, ma'am.
However, you have no body, do you?
No, Don Clark's body was not recovered.
So you couldn't perform an autopsy, right?
No, no autopsy was performed in this case.
So there's no determined cause of death.
Of death was injection with carfentanil.
Agent Branham, because you could not conduct an autopsy, there is no actual determined cause of death, is there?
No cause of death determined by an autopsy, that's correct.
There's also no determined murder weapon because you couldn't perform an autopsy, is that correct?
No murder weapon as deduced by an autopsy, again, correct.
Now, you said you searched the Big Gum Swamp, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
You had a whole team of special agents searching the swamp?
Yes.
As well as dogs trained in searching, right?
Yes.
However, you did not find Don Clark's body, right?
During that search, no, although, as I mentioned, Don Clark's body was extremely small given the size of that park, and Don Clark had been there for at least a week based on our conclusions in this case.
Agent Branham, is that a yes to my question? You did not find Don Clark's body in the swamp?
Yes, that's correct.
You also didn't find any syringe of elephant tranquilizer in the swamp, did you?
No.
You didn't find any footprints at the swamp?
No.
Any tire tracks?
No.
Or any wheelchair tracks, did you?
No, ma'am.
Miss Bassett's DNA was nowhere in the swamp, to your knowledge, right?
Well, we didn't test that swamp for human DNA, so I can't answer that.
Right, you didn't test the swamp for DNA, so you actually don't know if Miss Bassett was there based on forensic evidence.
Well, again, based on forensic evidence, we were able to link Miss Bassett to that swamp using the mud on those boots.
Well, let's talk about that forensic evidence. You reviewed the forensics report, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And it concluded that the algae from the swamp was found on Miss Bassett's boots, right?
Yes, that's correct.
You would recognize this forensics report if I showed it to you?
I would, yes. I believe it's Exhibit 5.
Now, my co-counsel is now screen sharing what's been previously admitted as Exhibit 5. I'd like to direct your attention to the last page of the exhibit. On here, it says that you can't be certain that the algae found on Miss Bassett's boots was from the swamp, can you?
That's correct. It was a reasonable scientific conclusion, not an absolute certainty.
So that is a yes, you can't be certain?
That's correct, yes.
It also says that you didn't cross-match the algae from the swamp with the algae at the park where Miss Bassett works and lives. Is that correct?
That's correct. The algae from the swamp was a very specific type. It would be highly unusual for such an algae to be found elsewhere.
I'm sorry, Agent Branham, did you cross-test the algae from the swamp with the algae at the park?
No, ma'am.
This forensics report also reveals that you can't be certain how the algae got onto the boots, can you?
No, we cannot.
You also can't be certain when it got there. Is that correct?
No, that's correct.
Based on the conclusions from this report, there are no fingerprints on the wheelchair, were there?
To my understanding, no.
Don Clark's DNA was not found on the wheelchair?
No, ma'am.
Miss Bassett's DNA was not found on the wheelchair either?
To my understanding, no, although I don't recall DNA testing that wheelchair.
So you didn't test the wheelchair that had algae on it that you believe is from the swamp?
Again, to my recollection, we did not know.
I'd like to talk to you about the day Mr. Clark disappeared. You reviewed his phone records from that day, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
You'd recognize them if I showed it to you?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, well, I'm now screen sharing Exhibit 21. I'd like to direct your attention to the second page of the exhibit. Line 3 here says that Mr. Clark texted his wife about taking a trip to Costa Rica. Is that correct?
Yes.
And then lines 7 and 8 show he was texting with a number in Costa Rica, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Now, let's go back to the first page of that exhibit. It shows that at 6 p.m. on August 18th, 2017, the day Mr. Clark disappeared, he was on the phone for 52 minutes with someone in Costa Rica. Is that correct?
Yes, that would appear so.
And to your knowledge, a few hours later was the last time anyone saw Don Clark again, right?
Yes, ma'am.
You also found Don Clark's car parked at the airport, right?
Yes, that's correct.
So to be clear, the day Mr. Clark disappeared, he was in conversation with someone in Costa Rica?
Yes.
And a few hours later, his car was driven to the Belle Leon airport near his home?
That's correct, yes.
All right, now I'd like to talk to you about Kelsey Stebbins, one of the park employees. The forensics report revealed that her fingerprints were in Don Clark's car, is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. Again, she did drive that van as part of her job.
You're aware that, from your interviews, you're aware that Ms. Stebbins was one of the few people with access to the elephant tranquilizers?
One of about a dozen people, I think.
Right, so she was one of the people with access to the elephant tranquilizers?
Yes, that's correct.
All right, Agent Branham, I want to talk to you about Lisa Clark, Mr. Clark's ex-wife. Mandy Tuminelli, Mr. Clark's attorney, wrote you a letter, right?
Yes.
You would recognize this letter?
Yes.
All right, I'm now screen sharing Exhibit 4. I'd like to direct your attention to the third paragraph. It says here that Lisa Clark sued Mr. Clark after their divorce, right?
Yes, I believe that there was a lawsuit.
It also says that she was harassing Mr. Clark, right?
That's Mr. Clark's claim, yes.
To the point where Mr. Clark and his attorney considered seeking a restraining order against Lisa Clark, right?
Yes, that's correct, although, again, they didn't pursue that restraining order.
That is a yes to my question. They considered seeking a restraining order because of her harassment?
Yes, they did.
So, Agent Branham, you interviewed Lisa Clark, didn't you?
I did attempt to interview Ms. Clark, although she didn't wish to cooperate. She didn't wish to become involved in the
Is
investigation.
it your testimony that you interviewed Lisa Clark as a part of your investigation?
Again, I attempted to interview Ms. Clark.
So you did not interview Lisa Clark as part of your investigation, right?
As I said, she didn't wish to become involved in the investigation.
Is that a yes to my question? You did not interview her?
Yes.
So you don't know what Lisa Clark was doing the night Mr. Clark disappeared. Is that correct?
That's correct.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you, defense counsel. Prosecution, any redirect examination?
Yes, Your Honor, briefly. Now, Attorney Charania asked you whether Don Clark's van was at the airport. Was his plane still in the hangar?
It was, ma'am, and interviews with airport staff revealed that none of them recalled seeing him on that night.
Objection, Your Honor, hearsay.
Your Honor, may I respond?
Sorry, as to which statement, defense counsel, can you clarify
That
this?
the air officials, either in Costa Rica or at the Bell Leon Airport in Tallahassee, Florida, said they didn't see Don Clark's plane depart. I believe that is being used for the truth of the matter asserted.
All right, prosecution counsel?
Yes, Your Honor. Pursuant to Rule 703, experts may testify to otherwise inadmissible hearsay evidence if that evidence is helping the expert explain what happened in that case. Now, this expert has testified that she relied upon various exhibits and her investigation. This conversation was a part of her investigation, and she's using her specialized knowledge to help the jury understand what happened at the airport, Your Honor.
Your Honor,
Okay.
if I may respond.
Go ahead.
Your Honor, what Agent Branham heard air officials either in Costa Rica or at the Bell Leon Airport say is not truly helpful or probative in determining what happened in this case, as it is something that she heard them say. Its credibility has not been established, so we have no idea as to whether or not it is true. However, it is being used for the truth of the matter asserted and is therefore inadmissible.
Your Honor, if I may?
Sure, last word.
The defense's theory on cross-examination was that Don Clark had fled somewhere. This is absolutely probative because it shows that Don Clark's van was in the airport, and Agent Branham is going to testify to that for the truth of the matter, but that is allowed under Rule 703, as experts are allowed to testify to otherwise inadmissible hearsay evidence if that evidence was reviewed as a part of their investigation, and they're using that evidence to explain their conclusion in court today.
I tend to agree. I think based on the qualifications that were offered at the beginning of this witness's direct examination, this falls within the scope of what the type of information that this expert or an expert in the field would reasonably rely on. It is in response to an inquiry brought up on cross-examination, and to that effect, I think it is probative. I think there's minimal danger of prejudice, certainly not to the point where I think the probative value does substantially outweigh the prejudicial effect. So I'm going to overrule that, and it will be considered.
Yes, Your Honor. I'd also like to point out time has expired.
Yes, so that's noted. So that last response will remain on the record, and examination will end there.
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. Anything further from the government?
This time the government rests.
All right. Prosecution has rested their case. Defense, do you have a case to present?
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the defense calls Joe Young to the stand.
All right. Mr. Young, you are constructively sworn.
Please tell the jury your full name.
My name is Joe Young.
Mr. Young, do you know the defendant in today's case, Kara Bassett?
Well, I knew her as Kara Clark, but yeah, I'm familiar with her.
How do you know her?
Well, in 2015, Miss Kara Bassett reached out to me and asked me to film a documentary about the work she and her husband were doing at an elephant zoo called the Greater Tallahassee Elephant Park.
Do you know her husband, Don Clark?
Yeah, Don was frequently at the park and he was part of the documentary.
Now, you told us you were shooting a documentary of them and their work at the elephant park. How often were you at the park?
Well, I was at the park 5 days a week for 2 years.
And Mr. Young, based on what you observed while shooting your documentary and working at the park with Kara Bassett and Don Clark, what do you know about their relationship?
Well, from what I saw, they were a really loving and affectionate couple. They really knew how to make things work.
Now, I'd like to talk to you about the day Mr. Clark disappeared, August 18th, 2017. Do you remember where you were that day?
Yeah, I was at the elephant park that day.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that day? How long were you at the zoo?
I was at the zoo from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m., and I spent most of the day with Kara.
Did you see Kara and Don have any arguments that day?
No arguments, no fights, just Kara and Don being normal. Kara and Don, nothing unusual.
Said nothing unusual happened between the two of them, but was there something else that happened that day that you would call unusual?
Yeah, as I was leaving the park that day at about 6 p.m., I had a conversation with Don, and it was a bit odd.
How so?
Well, at one point during the conversation, Don looked down at his phone, and then his face went sheet white. At that point, he said something like, "I need to take this," and then he walked away. And that was the last I ever saw or heard of Don Clark. And that matches an interview I had with one of the park employees.
I'm sorry, could you tell us what this interview was?
Hearsay?
Thank you. As to which statement?
That it matches an interview that this witness had with one of the park employees.
All right, defense response?
Yes, Your Honor. No explicit statement or assertion has been made, first of all. Second of all, I'm simply laying the foundation to enter an exhibit into evidence. So this witness is just testifying as to how he knows about this interview and who conducted it so that he can testify later on when I enter the exhibit itself.
Okay, can you make an offer of proof as to what that exhibit will show with respect to these statements, or is it?
Yes, this exhibit is going to show that Kelsey Stebbins, one of the park employees, had a similar experience with Don Clark the day he disappeared, where he was talking on the phone, worried and scared. So that is similar and matches what Mr. Young just testified to. And I proffer that Mr. Young will testify that he was the one that conducted this interview of Kelsey Stebbins. So I'm simply just laying the foundation that he can testify to the video itself.
Your Honor, if I may?
Sure.
First of all, the statement that it matches one of the interviews of one of the employees is hearsay because it implies that that interview did contain the same statements that this witness heard, Your Honor. And secondly, I would also object to that interview as being hearsay within itself.
Your Honor, may I respond?
Sure.
Your Honor, pursuant to Rule 8036, this interview and the video itself and whatever Mr. Young gathered from that interview is a record of regularly conducted activity. As Mr. Young was just about to say, he conducts interviews on a regular basis as part of his documentary of the park staff, Kara Bassett, Don Clark, anyone who worked at the park. He conducted interviews of on a regular basis, as he is a qualified custodian to testify to these interviews, because he is the one that conducted them, and he recorded them as part of conducting that activity on a regular basis, and it is therefore admissible into evidence.
Okay, defense counsel, I just want to make sure this is clear. So you're offering this as an exception to hearsay. You contend that you're using it for its truth value, and now you're saying it's a record of a regularly conducted activity?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, so based on that representation, I'm going to give you a little bit of leeway to lay the foundation for that interview, that the video recording, and then subject to further objections. So prosecution counsel, feel free to re-raise if you think that foundation has not been adequately established.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Young, you said you interviewed Kelsey Stebbins. Is that something you did for your documentary?
Yeah, a big part of filming a documentary is interviewing people. So I interviewed park employees, Kara, a lot of the time, yeah.
Did you record these interviews?
I did.
And would you recognize a clip of the interview you conducted with Kelsey Stebbins if I showed it to you?
Yes, I would.
Your Honor, at this time, the defense moves to enter what's been previously marked as Exhibit 48 into evidence. Pursuant to Stipulation 14, it's authentic and accurate in all respects.
All right, any objection?
No, Your Honor, there are no objections given the foundation under 8036.
All right, it will be admitted. And
Yes, Your Honor.
go to the jury.
Mr. Young, please listen silently as we play this video of Kelsey Stebbins.
The day he disappeared, I heard him on the phone. He was speaking Spanish, and he sounded very, very scared.
Mr. Young told us that was similar to the experience you had with Mr. Clark the day he disappeared. But when did you actually find out that Mr. Clark was missing?
Well, on August 18th of 2017, when I left the park, I actually had to catch a red-eye flight to Mexico City. I was going to meet some producers to talk about a new show, and I got back to the States on August 26th. So that's when I figured out that Don Clark disappeared. The park was just swarming with people in FBI jackets.
Did you continue shooting the documentary during the investigation?
I did. It was a tough decision, but when you're a professional documentary filmmaker, the show must go on.
And did you notice Miss Bassett acting any different after her husband disappeared?
Yes. After her husband disappeared, Kara Bassett looked devastated. She looked really unhappy. It was the worst I'd ever seen.
Now, Mr. Young, did you aid the investigation in any way?
The FBI and the local police asked me maybe one or two questions, but I wouldn't call that an interview.
Objection, Your Honor. Improper opinion as to what is actually considered an interview by the FBI, if I may elaborate.
Sure.
Your Honor, this witness is not an expert. He can't tell what is actually considered a valid FBI interview. Because he doesn't have any law enforcement background, he's not able to make that determination that that interaction with the FBI was not, in fact, an interview.
Your Honor, if I may respond.
Go ahead.
Your Honor, I don't believe this witness said anything about it being or not being a valid FBI interview. I believe he was just saying he was asked a couple questions, so he didn't know if that qualified as an interview. And as previously stated, he has conducted interviews as part of his documentary making and his career. So this wasn't being offered as expert testimony as to what an FBI interview must qualify as, but rather showing that this witness was only asked a few questions and is not even sure if that would qualify as an interview based on his rational perception.
I think that's fine. I think the witness is just testifying as to his impressions of the length of the interview and the scope and depth. I think the jury will be able to interpret whether or not they thought it was on their own. We'll instruct the jury that that's not to be taken for any. I'm happy to issue a limiting instruction if the parties will stipulate that's not expert testimony, but I think the jury will be fine.
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, overruled.
All right, Mr. Young, did you ever try and look for Don Clark?
I did. After Don disappeared, I decided to fly down to Costa Rica and see if I could find Don Clark there.
And what did you find in Costa Rica?
While I was at the park filming the documentary, Don had told me about a vacation home, so I flew down to Costa Rica to that vacation property, and I stuck in the window. Once I got outside, I saw that a fan was on.
Sorry, I believe we have an objection.
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay.
To my investigation as to how the witness would actually know that the address he went to was Don Clark's home in Costa Rica.
Response from the defense?
Yes, Your Honor. This witness has testified that he worked with Don Clark and Kara Bassett for 3 years, 5 days a week, every week for those 3 years, and that Don Clark traveled to Costa Rica and that he knew about Don Clark's home. This witness didn't know where the home was. He would simply say, I don't know where the home is. But this witness does know. As he just said, Don Clark told him he had a home and where it was.
Your Honor, if I may respond.
Sure, last word.
There are many homes in Costa Rica. Just because Don Clark said actually be able to determine which home Don Clark's was and any evidence pertaining to that home. He can't provide us with an address. He can't provide us with anything else that actually identifies that home as Don Clark's. And because of that, the evidence that he's going to present pertaining to that home is inadmissible.
I think that's a question of weight, counsel. You can cross-examine on that all you want. He testified that he's been working for, or that Mr. Clark was his employer for years and that this was the address that he believed to be his home. That's sufficient to support a finding that it was. If you think that there's some discrepancy with that fact, feel free to cross-examine on it.
Yes, Your Honor. What did you find in Don Clark's home in Costa Rica?
Well, when I stuck in the window, I found Dawn's clothes in the closet, and there was a fan on, and I couldn't see any dust anywhere.
Now, you said you interviewed people as part of your documentary, especially the park staffers. Did you continue these interviews during the investigation?
Yes, I conducted interviews with the park employees through that point.
Would you recognize a clip of one of the interviews with Kelsey Stebbins?
I would.
Your Honor, at this time, the defense moves to enter Exhibit 47 into evidence. Pursuant to Stipulation 14, it is authentic and accurate in all respects.
Okay, any objection to Exhibit 47?
There are no objections, Your Honor.
All right, 47 will be received.
Now screen sharing 47.
I don't get it. I worked with Dawn and Kara every day for 5 years, but the police didn't ask me a single question.
Mr. Young, is this consistent with what you learned from the interview with Kelsey Stebbins during the investigation?
It is.
Would you recognize another one of these clips of Ms. Stebbins?
I'm sure I would.
Your Honor, at this time, the defense moves to enter Exhibit 45 into evidence. Pursuant to Stipulation 14, it is authentic and accurate.
Any objections?
No objections, Your Honor.
Okay, it will be received.
One day, Don came up to me and shook his head. He said, "Have you ever thought about just leaving it all behind? No goodbyes, no see you laters, just up and leaving in the middle of the night?"
Mr. Young, is that consistent with what you learned from Kelsey Stebbins' interview?
It is.
Now, opposing counsel talked about an elephant tranquilizer and that they were kept at the park. Do you know anything about these tranquilizers?
Well, while I was at the park filming the documentary, I did notice people entering a storehouse to get tranquilizers.
Was Miss Bassett the only one with access to these tranquilizers?
No, from what I saw, about a dozen people had access to that storehouse.
Now, Mr. Young, I'd like to talk to you about Don Clark's ex-wife, Lisa Clark. Did you know her?
Yes, I did.
How?
Well, she would come to the park sometimes and throw a bit of a fit.
What do you mean?
Well, she would show up unexpectedly and threaten Don, and she was suing him for alimony at the time.
Your Honor, improper character evidence under 404B.
Your Honor, may I respond?
Go ahead, defense counsel, please respond.
Your Honor, pursuant to Rule 404B2, this is going to prove motive and intent of Lisa Clark. The fact that she had sued Don Clark for alimony after their divorce, had a hostile relationship with him, shows that she would have motive to at least hurt Don Clark, which is admissible under Rule 404B2, and these threats are also relevant under that rule.
Your Honor, if I may.
Please.
I'm not objecting to the fact that Lisa Clark was suing him for alimony, rather the fact that she threatened Don in the past. Now that is being used to show propensity. Because Lisa Clark threatened Don in the past, she might have committed the crime in today's case, and that is improper character evidence under 404B, Your Honor.
Okay, so let me just clarify the issue here. You're not taking issue with the lawsuit for alimony at all, so you have no objections to that part.
That's correct, Your Honor.
Okay, we're just dealing with these past threats. Defense counsel, can you explain very briefly just what offer, if any, there's going to be of any further explanation of these particular threats, if you have specificity as to what was said, or if it's just sort of a general, description of threats were made at some point?
Yes, Your Honor. This threat is including one where Lisa Clark threatened to kill Don Clark. That's not being used to show propensity, that because she threatened to kill him, that she actually did, but rather to show that she had the intent to kill him, because that is what she said. Not that she actually did on the day of, but rather to show that she had the intent and motive based off of their relationship and what she had said.
Your
Okay,
Honor,
response?
yes, my apologies. I didn't mean to cut you off before either. These statements do not contain the statement, "I want to kill Don Clark." Lisa Clark never says that within these statements. The statements that I believe defense is going to offer is, "I will wipe you off the face of the earth," that you'll be sorry. Those statements don't specifically say, "I want to kill Don Clark." And because of that, they're improper character evidence under 404B, Your Honor.
Okay. I'm prepared to rule. So it's not character evidence. The court finds it's not character evidence because we're not trying to show propensity in respect to past action being the same action in the future. We're not trying to say that, as far as I know, that because she threatened him before, that she's going to threaten him in the future. This is just an admission by a party opponent, and it is pertinent to motive, but I don't think the character evidence rules are even implicated here because we're not trying to show conformity with a past act under that rule. So it'll be overruled.
Yes, Your Honor. You said Lisa Clark threatened Don Clark. Do you remember the threat?
Yeah, Lisa Clark said, "I will wipe you off the face of the earth. You'll be sorry."
What happened after she threatened Don Clark?
Well, Dawn had to call the police because she was refusing to leave and just being threatening.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor.
Also, sorry, while we're paused here, I want to clarify the record. I'm sorry about the prior misconception. I erroneously stated that it was an admission by a party. That doesn't change the ruling, but I just want to clarify that is not a party statement. However, there's no character evidence implication for the same reason. It's not a past action conformity. A threat is just a separate issue from, you're not saying she threatened her in the future. I just want to clarify the record on that. Thank you.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Mr. Young.
Good afternoon.
I'd like to talk to you a little bit about Kara Bassett. We can agree that she is very passionate about elephants, correct?
Yeah, Kara's passionate about the things that she loves.
And we can agree that she even asked you to film this documentary about elephants, right?
Yeah, she wanted people to care about elephants and to show off her work.
Now, you said on direct that you chose to keep filming this documentary after Don Clark had disappeared. But to be clear for the jury, it was Kara Bassett who insisted on that, correct?
It was a joint decision. Of course, if I decided to step away, then there would have been no one filming it. But it was a joint decision between me and Miss Bassett, yes.
So that's a yes to my question. She did have input on continuing to film?
Yes, she said that she wanted to show people that she was strong and to be a good role model.
Now, we can agree that for this documentary, you were authorized by Kara Bassett to film her and all of her employees, right?
That's correct.
Exhibits 35 through 38 are films from that documentary that were filmed on June 15th, 2017.
That's correct. Those are interviews from Elephant Queen.
Your Honor, at this time, the prosecution offers exhibits 35 through 38 into evidence.
Any objection?
No objections, Your Honor.
All right, they will be received.
Mr. Ruderman, can you please play exhibits 37 and 38 for the jury?
Nothing is more important to me than these animals. Nothing. People look at me and they think I'm sweet and nice. Go on. Keep underestimating me. I will lobby senators. I will protest big businesses. I will get in your face. I will take people to their grave if I have to. I will do anything to protect these elephants.
Mr. Young, I'd like to talk to you about who she thought she needed to protect those elephants from. We can agree that you saw Don and Kara Bassett fight several times about the business, correct?
Well, when you're a documentary filmmaker, you see the good, the bad, and the ugly, so yeah.
We can agree that the defendant wanted the business to be a sanctuary, while Don wanted it to be a zoo.
That's what they expressed.
Mr. Ruderman, can you please play Exhibit 36 for the jury? It's already been admitted into evidence.
Oh, I'm steaming. This is a business, not a charity. As long as it's my money, we'll run it that way. Said to me, can you believe that? We'll see how this ends.
Now, Mr. Young, I'm showing you a timeline of Don's disappearance. We can agree that the defendant made the following comments on June 15th, 2017, correct?
Yeah.
And then 2 months later, Don Clark was nowhere to be found, right?
That's my understanding.
Now let's fill in the gaps between those 2 months. we can agree that you once saw Kara get so angry at Don that she threw a vase at his head, correct?
Again, as a documentary filmmaker, you see everything. So, yeah.
And that was in late July or August of 2017?
Yeah, but that's as heated as things ever got.
But to be clear, you don't have footage of that fight, do you?
Not at the moment.
That's because Kara Bassett made you erase or stop your camera anytime she and Don were fighting, correct?
Well, yeah.
Now, I'd like to talk to you about something you said on direct. You said that you went to Costa Rica to see Don Clark's house, but to be clear, you can't provide us with an exact address of that house.
I've decided not to share the address in particular, privacy.
But we can agree that you don't mention that address anywhere in your statement or in this case materials, right?
Again, yes, I don't feel comfortable sharing it.
And we can agree that when you got to that house, all the lights were off.
The lights were off.
There was no food in the refrigerator.
Not that I could see.
No toiletries.
Not that I found.
You didn't see any suitcases lying around.
Not visibly.
And no one entered or exited that house for a week, correct?
Well, I'm a documentary filmmaker, not a stalker, so I wasn't there 24/7, but when I was near the property, I didn't see anyone enter or exit.
But sir, that's a yes to my question. When you were at that house, you didn't see anyone enter or exit for a week, correct?
Oh, right, when I was there.
Now, I want to talk to you about another interview you did. You interviewed Kelsey Stebbins about her account of the syringes on the date of Don Clark's disappearance, correct?
That is one of the interviews I did with Kelsey.
Your Honor, at this time, the prosecution offers Exhibit 46 in the evidence.
Any objection?
No objections, Your Honor.
All right, 46 will be received.
Mr. Runeman, can you please play that exhibit for the jury?
I do a count of the tranquilizers every Friday, and August 18th was no different. When I left at 6 p.m., they were all there. 24 syringes.
So, Mr. Young, just to be clear, when you left the property and when Kelsey Stebbins left the property on the date of Don Clark's disappearance, all 24 syringes were there. Is that correct?
That's what Kelsey Stebbins said. I didn't work with the syringes, but yeah, that's what she said.
And to be clear, Don Clark and Kara Bassett were the only people who stayed at the park after hours, after all the employees left, correct?
I'm not entirely sure. I know I left at 6 p.m. and they were the people who were at the park when I left.
Well, you know that Don and the defendant were the only people who lived on the park's property?
As far as I'm aware, yeah.
And that video date, that's the last time you ever saw Don Clark, correct?
That's correct.
Thank you, Mr. Young. I have nothing further, Your Honor.
Thank you, counsel. Any redirect examination?
Briefly, Your Honor. Mr. Young, opposing counsel talked a lot about Kara Bassett and Don Clark's relationship, but to be clear for the jury, did you ever see Kara Bassett hurt Don Clark?
No, I was at the park 5 days a week, 2 years straight, never saw them hurting each other.
Did you ever see Kara Bassett threaten Don Clark?
No.
And to be clear, did you see Lisa Clark threaten Don Clark?
Yeah, she would show up to the park
I
unexpectedly.
think we have an objection. Sorry, go ahead.
Yes, Your Honor, outside the scope of cross-examination.
All right, you can respond briefly, defense counsel.
Yes, Your Honor. This is opposing counsel talked about Kara Bassett and Mr. Clark's relationship and was trying to insinuate the violent nature of their relationship. This is simply going to rebut that because she was saying that Kara Bassett was the only one who had that type of relationship with Don. I'm simply rebutting that by bringing in people who did have that type of relationship.
Your Honor,
Last word, sure.
I didn't mention Lisa Clark at all on cross-examination. Now, defense covered this on direct examination, and because I didn't mention it in the direct, Your Honor.
I tend to agree. I think it's outside the scope, and in any event, this point has been well established. I think it's been asked and answered. You made this point clear on direct examination. It's been fleshed out. So as to the questions regarding Lisa Clark's relationship with the victim, that will be sustained.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Mr. Young, from the time that you've spent at the park, what have you observed about the nature of the relationship between Kara Bassett and Don Clark?
I was at the park for, again, 2 years, 5 days a week. And when I saw Kara and Don, they were an affectionate couple. And their relationship on August 18th was in a really great spot.
No further questions, Your Honor.
All right, thank you very much. Anything further?
Nothing further, Your Honor.
All right. Defense, do you have any further evidence to present?
Your Honor, at this time, the defense rests its case in chief.
All right, both parties have rested. The record is closed. And with that, we will proceed to closing arguments. So again, just a quick reminder, let's give our jurors a minute to change their view from gallery back to speaker mode. And with that, prosecution, you may proceed with your closing argument whenever you're ready.
Yes, Your Honor. May it please the court. He was just a means to an end. In today's case, we, the government, had the burden of proof. We had to prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant, Kara Bassett, intentionally killed her husband, Don Clark. As the jury, we more than met that burden today because we showed you three things: the intentions, the incriminating evidence, and the inconsistencies. First, the intentions. One thing that everyone here can agree on is that the defendant is extremely passionate about elephants. Obsessed even. You saw the video clip that Joe Young filmed. She said that she would take people to their graves if they were treating the animals in a way she didn't approve of. Members of the jury, you saw a video clip from that very same day saying the defendant was steaming at her husband for his treatment of the animals. Members of the jury, those threats didn't just stop there. They turned into actions. You heard Kara Bassett threw a vase at Don Clark's head when they were arguing about the business. Joe Young tried to tell you that their relationship was in a good place. But members of the jury, a good relationship is not one where a wife throws a vase at her husband's head. Despite the threats, Don Clark's response was always the same. He knew that Kara Bassett knew that Don Clark wasn't going to change the operation of the park. So she came up with a plan to make his money her money. You heard that she approached Don's lawyer 3 months before he disappeared to get power of attorney, which ensured that when he went missing, she inherited his funds. Just 2 months after Don Clark was gone, you learned the defendant wasn't grieving. She wasn't looking for her husband. She was using his money to open the park as a sanctuary. Second, the incriminating evidence. Agent Branham came before you and told you that a syringe of carfentanil went missing from the park's property on the date of Don Clark's disappearance. And you heard that that syringe wasn't missing when all of the employees left the park at 6 p.m. And who were the only people who lived there? Just Don and the defendant. By the time the FBI investigated, Don was dead and there were only 23. I expect Attorney Charania to tell you that Kara Bassett didn't commit this crime, that the evidence doesn't point to her. But members of the jury, remember the algae evidence from Big Gum Swamp. Ask yourselves, why was Don Clark's van driven to the Big Gum Swamp in the middle of the night on the night of his disappearance? Why was algae specific to that location on Kara Bassett's boots, a van, and a wheelchair? because she killed him. She needed to hide the evidence. And third, the inconsistencies. Members of the jury, the defense would like you to believe that Kara Bassett and Don Clark had a good relationship, that the defendant was concerned about her husband when he went missing. But if that was the case, why didn't she call him? Why didn't she text him? Why didn't she try to contact him in any way whatsoever? It takes 2 seconds to send a text. Where are you? But she didn't do that. She didn't say that because she knew where Don Clark was. He was in the Big Gum Swamp, right where she dumped him. Members of the jury, the defense would like you to believe that Don Clark is still alive, that because his plane was at the airport, that he might have gone somewhere. But Agent Branham told you that that plane never left the airport. No flights went out of that location. Not only that, but no one has seen or heard from Don Clark in 3 years. All evidence points to the fact that Don Clark is dead. And why is he dead? Because Kara Bassett used him as a means to an end. Find the defendant guilty. Thank you.
Thank you, prosecution counsel. Defense, closing argument, you may proceed whenever you're ready.
May it please the court. I will wipe you off the face of the earth. You'll be sorry. Members of the jury, make no mistake. These are not the words of Kara Bassett. These words came straight from Lisa Clark. They were used to threaten Don Clark to the point where he had to call the police to ensure his safety. Did you hear from Lisa Clark today? Did the government answer the question of where she was the night Mr. Clark disappeared? Ms. Aikens failed to answer that question because the government was looking in the wrong direction. The government failed to meet their burden. They failed to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Don Clark is even dead. They failed to prove that Ms. Bassett was the one who killed him, and they failed to prove her intent and motive. Now, we don't even know if Don Clark is dead. Investigator Branham told you that they have no body, no determined cause of death, no manner of death, no time of death. They don't even know what the murder weapon is. The government didn't even look into the possibility that he could be in Costa Rica, even though his car was found at the airport from where he frequently flew to Costa Rica. Even though Mr. Clark spoke to one of his employees about wanting to start over and disappear. Even though he mentioned an upcoming trip to Costa Rica and was on the phone in Spanish with someone in Costa Rica. But the FBI didn't look for him. They didn't interview locals in Costa Rica. They knew there were several possibilities that could explain Mr. Clark's disappearance, but they looked the other way. And in doing so, they failed to answer one of the key questions of this case. Is Don Clark dead? Now, the government failed to prove Mr. Clark is dead, but let's pretend for one moment that he is dead. The government still failed to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Miss Bassett was the one who killed him. The government was so keen on hanging this on Miss Bassett, so focused on looking in the wrong direction, that they turned their cheek when it came to ruling out other suspects. Agent Branham told you that Kelsey Stebbins was one of the few people with access to the tranquilizers, and her fingerprints were in Don Clark's car. Yet you saw a video of Miss Stebbins saying she was never interviewed by the police, meaning she has no alibi for the night Mr. Clark disappeared. Now, instead of the government in their way, they didn't even interview Lisa Clark, Mr. Clark's ex-wife, who threatened to sue him, who threatened to kill him, who harassed him constantly to the point where Mr. Clark and his attorney considered seeking a restraining order against her, to the point where Mr. Clark had to call the police to ensure his safety. But you didn't even hear from Lisa Clark today. We have no idea what Lisa Clark was doing the night Mr. Clark disappeared. She has no alibi. Now, the government told you that because there's algae from the swamp on Miss Bassett's boots, that she's guilty. But Agent Branham told you they're not even certain the algae is from the swamp. He told you they didn't even cross-test the algae from the swamp with the algae at the park where Miss Bassett works and lives. They don't know how it got there, they don't know when it got there, and they are not certain that it is from the swamp. Yet again, another hole in the government's case, and yet again, they looked in the wrong direction. There's no wheelchair tracks at the swamp, no blood at the swamp, no murder weapon, yet they still expect you to believe that Miss Bassett, a woman who is 5'4", carried her husband out of bed after killing him, put him in a wheelchair, drove him to the swamp, and then used the wheelchair to dump the body in the swamp, but there's still no tracks. No one saw Miss Bassett at the swamp. The government tried to paint Miss Bassett as an obsessed woman who didn't act the way a normal wife would act. But members of the jury, you heard that Miss Bassett and Mr. Clark's relationship was complicated, and so was her response. There's no doubt they had a fundamental difference in opinion on how the park should be run, but a difference in opinion is a normal part of marriage, and it does not equate to motive for murder. Miss Bassett is an animal rights activist who values life so much she can't even see an elephant in a cage. The government expects you to believe this woman is capable of cold-blooded murder? The government failed to prove that Mr. Clark is even dead. They failed to rule out other suspects, and they failed to prove Miss Bassett's intent or motive. Over and over again, the government looked in the wrong direction. Members of the jury, when you go into that deliberation room, before you can fill out the verdict form, you must answer this one question. Do you know that Dawn Clark is dead? You have a woman's life in your hands. So your answer can't be no. It can't be maybe. You can't pause. You can't hesitate. It has to be a hard yes. Anything short of that, and the government failed to meet their burden. And you must deliver justice and find Kara Bassett not guilty. Thank you.
Thank you, defense counsel. Prosecution, seems that our time remaining is 1:40, so you may deliver your rebuttal whenever you're ready.
Yes, Your Honor. Members of the jury, the defense just talked a lot about Lisa Clark. They want you to believe that she committed this crime based on the fact that she threatened Dawn in the past. But if threatening Dawn in the past is enough reason for the defense to believe that she committed this crime, why can't they believe that Kara Bassett committed this crime? She threatened Dawn. She said that she would take people to their graves. She said she was steaming. On top of all that, you heard that she threw a vase at Dawn Clark's head. Meanwhile, you never heard Lisa Clark escalate to violence. You never heard Dawn file a restraining order against Lisa Clark. You never heard Dawn Clark say that he was scared of Lisa. Members of the jury, Lisa Clark didn't have access to the carfentanil. The defense completely failed to explain why that syringe was missing. Lisa Clark didn't have algae on her boots that was a match to the Big Gum Swamp. As for Kelsey Stebbins, you heard today that it was her job to drive that van around the park. Of course her fingerprints would be on. The defense also tried to tell you that Dawn Clark might not be dead because the government hasn't found the body or the murder weapon. Members of the jury, let's think about the Big Gum Swamp. Agent Branham told you that it was 13,000 acres. Of course, the government didn't find the body. Government didn't even know he was missing until a week after the event happened, because Kara Bassett failed to report it. Find the defendant guilty. Thank you.
Thank you, prosecution counsel. With that, the matter is submitted, and we'll give just a minute for our judges to finish completing their ballots, and then we'll do comments. Great job, everyone.